When they met again, one was a nightclub hostess, and the other had been married for 2 years. Xiao Shi's first time was auctioned for a high price of 300,000, and Sister Zhou said it was likely someone she knew. Xiao Shi put on makeup and changed into her outfit, carrying a tray to the 888 VIP room, feeling anxious. Xiao Shi had been working at this nightclub for 3 years, but she had always maintained her innocence. Even when she occasionally delivered drinks to rooms and was taken advantage of by guests, she endured it for the sake of tips. But now she had no choice. She needed a large sum of money and had to ask Sister Zhou to sell herself. Since Sister Zhou said it was someone familiar, it must be that frequent guest. After arriving at the door, Xiao Shi adjusted her clothes, put on a faint smile, and reached out to push open the room door. Mr. Zhou. Xiao Shi's words were cut off abruptly due to the atmosphere and people inside the room. The lighting in the private room was dim, and several men were sitting on the sofa, with hostesses snuggling in their arms. What was originally filled with laughter suddenly quieted down as everyone turned to look at Xiao Shi when she entered. Xiao Shi glanced at them and immediately spotted the man in the corner. His legs crossed, he exuded an air of indifference and gloom. His profoundly familiar features made Xiao Shi's face turn deathly pale in an instant. Sorry, wrong room. Xiao Shi said hurriedly, trying to turn around and leave. Hey, aren't you Xiao Shi? Someone came over, grabbing Xiao Shi, and another person went to adjust the lights to be brighter. In a revealing maid outfit and holding a tray, Xiao Shi was suddenly revealed to everyone in the room. Then came the gasps, as those sitting on the sofa whispered among themselves, with their meaning being nothing other than disbelief that the once proud school beauty had become a hostess. The disdain in their remarks was unmistakable. Xiao Shi struggled with her hand, trying to make the person let go. The person holding her pulled her towards the sofa and directly tossed her at the feet of the man in the corner, laughing as he said, "Brother Dongling, this is the first time that I spent 300,000 to buy for you. Is that so?" Ji Huaibei chuckled, his gaze roaming over Xiao Shi's face without any warmth. Suddenly, he extended his foot, the tip of his shiny leather shoe pressing against Xiao Shi's chin, and nonchalantly said, "A woman I've been with for 2 years for 50,000 bucks, and she still manages to present herself as innocent." The entire private room erupted in laughter, except for Xiao Shi, whose face turned pale repeatedly. Isn't it all about the money? There's no choice. Xiao Shi suppressed the pain in her heart. In just a few seconds, she smiled charmingly at the man, resting her hand on his thigh. "Mr. G, if you still want to keep me, the price has gone up." "A bitch. Too dirty for me." The words pierced Zhou Shi's heart like a knife, yet she had to force a smile. Ji Huaibei took out a cigarette, and immediately a woman leaned over to light it for him. He took 2 puffs, pointed at the thick stack of cash on the table, and said, "Please me. If I'm satisfied, all this money will be yours." Someone laughed and said, "Wow, is young Master Ji planning to give us a live spring romance performance?" The others in the private room also laughed, their gazes shifting in this direction. However, Ji Huaibei merely sat there, coldly watching Xiao Shi, like an aloof emperor high above it all. Faced with this kind of humiliating demand, Xiao Shi would have politely walked away in the past. But now, she needed money. Ignoring the stares of the people around her, Xiao Shi threw herself into pleasing Ji Huaibei, pressing herself gently against him. Yet his expression remained unchanged, his gaze still filled with disdain. "Campus belle, that's boring. Put in some effort. Who knows, maybe trying harder will get you the money." Someone from the crowd suddenly shouted, and everyone joined in, egging her on. Xiao Shi's body went rigid. Ji Huaibei seemed to notice Xiao Shi's discomfort, took a puff of smoke, and blew it in her face, sneering, "Isn't anything possible for money? What's wrong? Forgotten how? If you want to watch, of course you can." Xiao Shi replied with a smile. Xiao Shi bit her lip tightly, enduring the humiliation he inflicted. Ji Huaibei glanced around, then looked at Xiao Shi twice. His expression turned extremely cold. Before Xiao Shi could react, she was dragged by her hair and pulled directly into the suite. Only after nearly half an hour did the brutal exercise end. Ji Huaibei zipped up his pants, his suit remaining impeccably wrinkle-free, exuding elegance and nobility. He glanced at the woman in the bathtub, her body covered in bruises, let out a cold laugh, and turned to leave. Seeing him leave, Xiao Shi hurriedly picked up her tattered clothes and followed him out. "Mr. Ji." Xiao Shi clung to his sleeve, her legs trembling in pain, barely able to stand. She smiled at him. "What Mr. Ji did to me went beyond what was discussed, so the price is to go up." Ji Huaibei flung her hand away, a look of disgust on his face as he mockingly said, I remember your boyfriend's family isn't short on money. How come you can't even come up with a mere hundred and tens of thousands, and you have to work as a hostess? She smiled bitterly in her heart. She didn't have a boyfriend at all. The person she liked had always been the same one. Mr. G is asking too many questions. She smiled, flirtatiously tucking her hair behind her ear. Or is Mr. G planning to back out after it's done? Eat for free. Ji Huibei glanced at her and took out his phone to instruct someone to send money, then turned to leave. That day, She went to the dressing room to change clothes and get ready for work. The hospital called to say Xiao Zhe's condition had relapsed. She dropped everything, frantically ran out to hail a cab, and headed straight to the hospital. Her hands were still shaking in the car, filled with fear. Zhe, please, don't let anything happen to you. By the time She arrived at the hospital, Xiao Zhe had already completed his surgery. The doctor said that his condition was temporarily stable and added, I still recommend that Miss Xiao send your younger brother abroad for surgery. The success rate is at least 50%. Thank you, doctor. She went to Xiao Zhe's ward and sat down by the bedside. 3 years ago, an accident took everything from her, leaving only her young brother by her side. To afford his treatment, she even sold herself to a nightclub. Zhe, big sister will surely save you, She said, holding his hand, her voice choked with sobs. Half an hour later, She left the ward. A few days ago, she received a sum from the club for selling her first night and got a tip from Ji Huibei, but these were far from enough for treatment abroad. She had to earn money, desperately. In her haste, she didn't notice and bumped into someone coming towards her. I'm sorry. She apologized, but she froze completely when she looked up and saw that familiar man. Yet Ji Huibei acted as if he didn't see her at all, not even lifting his eyelids. It's all right, the woman said with a smile, quickly linking arms with Ji Huibei and walking past Xiaoxi. Xiaoxi stood there foolishly and faintly. She seemed to hear the woman calling Ji Huibei husband, saying, Honey, how do you want to celebrate our second wedding anniversary? Just like last year. At this moment, Xiaoxi felt not only physically stiff, but also chilled to the bone. In order to send Xiao Zhe abroad for medical treatment as soon as possible, Xiaoxi is desperately trying to make money and is taking on any work she can get. As long as the pay is good enough, she can even dance provocatively in private rooms. Mr. Zhou, a regular client of Xiaoxi, visited once. Zhou Su learned from others about Xiaoxi auctioning her first night and regretfully said, If I had known that was your first night, I wouldn't have gone on a business trip abroad. Xiaoxi smiled, You've already been kind enough to me. It's my greed that needs money. Zhou Su held Xiaoxi's hand and said softly, Xiao, if you're willing, I can help you end this kind of life. You know I really like you. Xiaoxi quietly withdrew her hand. Zhou Su had said this several times, but he was a married man with his own kids. Even though he didn't get along with his wife, Xiaoxi didn't want to ruin someone else's marriage. I know, it's just that this line of work is too tainted. Mr. Zhou, you are my only friend, and I don't want to taint your life. Xiao, you know I don't mind those things. Xiaoxi shook her head, gently refusing. After sending Zhou Su off, it wasn't long before Ji Huibei arrived. He walked past Xiaoxi directly and entered one of the VIP rooms. That was one of the rooms Xiaoxi was responsible for, so she followed him into that room. Ji Huibei. For the first time, Xiaoxi called his name, standing before him like a clown. If she could, she would have never asked for his help in her entire life, but she had no choice. If selling herself could get her money, she would rather choose Ji Huibei. Xiaoxi opened her mouth, and after a long while, a few monosyllabic words finally came out. Can you lend me some money? Money. Ji Huibei let out a short laugh, his tone icy. In this place, couldn't you just spread your legs a few times and make tens of thousands? Why would you still need to borrow from me? Xiaoxi wanted to speak, but his harsh and unfeeling words stabbed her again. What do I have to do with you? I could lend you money, but do you have any collateral? Ji Huibei asked, glancing at her up and down. How long have you been staying in this place? 2 years? 3 years? That area's probably all worn out by now. Do you think I'd still want it? Xiaoxi's chest tightened with pain to the point where she could barely breathe. She couldn't understand how he had turned into someone who only knew how to endlessly humiliate her. Ji Huibei lit another cigarette, seeming to have no intention of paying her any mind. Xiaoxi felt her heart gradually grow cold until suddenly Ji Huibei said, Be my mistress, and I will give you a sum of money every month. Xiaoxi turned her head, glaring at him with wide eyes. What, do you think you can expect anything else? Ji Huibei's gaze was disdainful as he said coldly, Someone like you is only useful to me when I have needs. I'm sorry, I don't accept. Xiao Shi's hands trembled. She knew he was married, and had been for 2 years already. Xiao Shi opened the door, intending to leave, but Ji Huaibei's voice sounded from behind. I went to see your brother. The doctor said his condition has worsened and he needs immediate treatment. No one but me can give you enough money for his treatment. Xiao Shi turned around, so angry she could barely speak. Ji Huaibei, you're shameless. How could you? Ji Huaibei exhaled a ring of smoke, utterly expressionless. Whether your brother lives or dies depends on your choice. After a moment of deadlock, Xiao Shi released her grip from the doorknob, walked over to Ji Huaibei, and asked bitterly, if I do it, how much can you give me each month? 200,000. If you please me, I might even send your brother abroad for treatment. Xiao Shi said, all right, I agree. Agreeing isn't just about saying it. Ji Huaibei sneered, spreading his hands on the sofa back like a lofty monarch. You know what my demand is now. The next day, she resigned from the nightclub and went to the apartment Ji Huaibei provided for her. It was far from the city and sparsely populated, suggesting that Ji Huaibei really was keeping her as a mistress. Xiao Shi deposited all the cash into her card, bought the snacks and toys Xiao Zhe liked, and went to the hospital. Xiao Zhe was nestled in the hospital bed reading comic books, looking in good spirits. As soon as Xiao Shi entered, the little guy raised his smiling face and asked excitedly, Sister, do you have a day off today? Yes, that's why I came to see A's. Xiao Shi smiled as she handed over the toy she bought for the little guy, who couldn't be happier, holding onto the transformer toy as if he would never let it go. Xiao Shi sat down by the hospital bed, looking at her innocent and carefree brother, feeling a slight sense of comfort. At least she still had a brother, a reason to keep going. Xiao Shi stayed at the hospital, having lunch and dinner with Lin Rui, reading him stories from storybooks. Whenever Ji Huaibei called, she would have to lie to Xiao Zhe and rush back. Upon returning to the apartment, Xiao Shi found that Ji Huaibei reeked of alcohol, seemingly having drunk too much. She headed to the kitchen to prepare a hangover soup and brought it out to him. Ji Huaibei threw a document onto the table, his voice cold even in his drunken state. Sign it. Xiao Shi opened it to see an agreement concerning their relationship. To her shock, it even included a clause stating, if Party A does not agree to Party B's departure, the contract is extended indefinitely. Her face turned pale instantly. A woman like you, who knows if you'll take the money and run. Ji Huaibei spoke with a cold, unfeeling tone, even mocking her. I'd feel more at ease if we signed a contract. Mr. Ji is right. Despite the humiliation, Xiao Shi signed her name on the document, thinking they'd see what happens. Ji Huaibei provided for Xiao Shi, but he didn't come by often, sometimes not visiting for nearly a week. When he did come, it was at night or midnight, slipping in while Xiao Shi was drowsy from sleep. Perhaps Ji Huaibei thought Xiao Shi had behaved well and gave her an additional sum of money. Xiao Shi saved all the money, watching the savings grow from 6 figures to 7, barely able to contain her excitement. It might not be long before she could send Zhe abroad for treatment. That day, Ji Huaibei called, I'll come over for dinner tonight. Xiao Shi was momentarily stunned when she received the call. Since moving into the apartment, she had always eaten alone. He only ever came over at night or in the middle of the night. I'm speaking. Did you not hear me? I heard you. Xiao Shi replied, and after hanging up the phone, she felt inexplicably pleased. After changing clothes, she went to the hospital first. Seeing Xiao Shi happy, Xiao Zhe said, Sister, you look so happy. That's because soon I'll be able to take A's abroad. Xiao Shi patted the little guy's head and said with a smile, after A's surgery, we'll go to Disney World, okay? Xiao Zhe nodded vigorously. You promise, sister. You can't lie to me. I won't lie to you. Usually, Xiao Shi was too lazy to go out and would order groceries online to cook at home. But since Ji Huaibei said he'd come over for dinner tonight, she went to the market and carefully selected ingredients. By the time she came out carrying several bags of groceries, she was covered in sweat. Xiao Shi was about to hail a cab by the roadside when a Porsche stopped at her feet. The car window rolled down, and Zhou Su leaned over from the driver's seat to look at Xiao Shi, smiling. Jojo, doing some grocery shopping? Xiao Shi greeted him. Mr. Zhou. Zhou Su asked her if they could find a place to talk. Seeing that it was still early, Xiao Shi got into his car, and they went into a cafe and found a spot to sit down. After the waiter took the menu and left, Zhou Su said, I went to see you the day before yesterday.
Sister Zhou said you resigned.
How come you changed your phone number without telling me? I was afraid of disturbing your life, Mr. Zhou. Xiao Shi was not lying about this. At the nightclub, she was very grateful that Zhou Su always chose her, but that didn't mean some boundaries could be crossed. Besides, she already had a man in her heart and couldn't accommodate anyone else. Zhou Su looked at her for a moment and asked, "Are you currently with your ex-boyfriend?" She considered Zhou Su a close friend and had told him many things, including matters from her past. Seeing Zhou Su's question, she nodded and admitted, but her smile was tinged with bitterness. "But I won't be with him for much longer." Xiao, you're so good. Why demean yourself like this?" Zhou Su felt she was undervaluing herself and couldn't help saying, "I've drafted the divorce papers. Wan Qing and I will be divorced next month once she signs." She was stunned. "You're getting a divorce just because you're not compatible? What about your son?" "She has people outside, more than one, and I've had enough of this life," Zhou Su said, firmly grasping Xi's hand that was on the table. Xiao, would you be willing to accept me and my son?" Their table was against the glass window, and across the street from the cafe, a luxury car had its window partially rolled down, with a pair of grim eyes staring fiercely at them. Ji Huaibei wished he could rush in and strangled Xiaoxi. He had put everything aside, bought gifts, and came back early wanting to have a good talk. As long as she was willing to clear up past matters, he was ready to let go of everything. In the end, Xiaoxi, just like 3 years ago, stabbed his heart with a metaphorical knife, leaving him deeply disappointed. Xiaoxi returned to the apartment a little after 6, cooking, washing vegetables, ling around the kitchen. Thinking about having dinner together later made her very happy. In the end, she waited until 8:30, but Ji Huaibei still hadn't come back. She couldn't help herself. She dialed his number for the first time. When the call connected, she asked, "Huaibei, didn't you say you'd come back for dinner? When will you be back? Do I have to inform you when I'm coming over?" Ji Huaibei replied coldly. She clenched her phone and heard him continue, "Xiaoxi, you'd better remember your place." After Ji Huaibei finished speaking, he hung up the phone. Xiaoxi slowly put down the phone and looked at the table full of dishes that had gone cold, mocking herself in her heart. "Xiaoxi, oh Xiaoxi, what exactly are you hoping for?" The doctor said that Azay's condition had slightly improved, which was the happiest news she had heard in a long time. She frowned and forced a smile in front of the mirror over and over again, afraid of letting her emotions affect Azay. "Miss Jiao, although the patient's condition has slightly improved, I still recommend transferring him abroad for treatment as soon as possible. If we miss the window of opportunity, even the greatest doctor from history would be unable to help." She clutched her bag with a hint of a smile on her lips. "I understand. Thank you, doctor." As usual, she brought delicious and fun things for Ace, everything that he loved most. A child's happiness always comes so easily. Seeing A's happy and joyful expression, she felt that everything she did was worthwhile, and she had no regrets. She hugged Ace, trying hard to feel his warmth, as if she could gain infinite strength from him. "Ace, once I save enough money, I'll take you abroad immediately." "Okay." Since the last time, it had been a long while since she saw Ji Huaibei. However, she didn't mind. She continued to fulfill her responsibilities, only concerned whether the money he promised had been wired into her account. By coincidence, she was checking her account when Ji Huaibei suddenly returned. She put down her phone to help him hang up his coat, then took shoes out from the shoe cabinet for him, squatting slightly in front of him. From beginning to end, she didn't say a word, only quietly doing what she believed was her duty. Looking at her humble and submissive demeanor, Ji Huaibei unexpectedly felt a strange sensation arise within him. Wasn't this expression, bowed head and obedient look, his favorite to see on her? Why, then, did seeing her like this make him feel somewhat irritable? "I'll do it myself," he said aloud. She didn't say anything either. Standing quietly by his side, she seemed to be waiting for his instructions. She had even mentally prepared herself for the torment she expected to follow. The atmosphere was somewhat silent, no longer thick with the earlier tension of drawn swords. Ji Huaibei loosened his tie as he sat on the sofa, his refined features betraying a hint of fatigue. His slender fingers pressed lightly against his acupressure point. She noticed all of this. Despite herself, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of heartache for him. "You haven't eaten yet, have you?" she asked. "I came straight from the company. Where would I have had the time to eat?" Ji Huaibei spoke without opening his eyes. He had been swamped with company matters recently, and tonight he finally had a little bit of free time to come straight to her. He didn't know why, but even though he harbored some resentment towards her, his body and mind still missed her. In unguarded moments, he would drift off and think of her, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing. Of course, these are things he would never tell Xiaoxi. Ji Huaibei suddenly snapped back to reality, realizing he was thinking about the woman right in front of him. He opened his eyes, and the woman who was just in the main hall was suddenly nowhere to be seen. Xiaoxi's life alone was simple because Ji Huaibei didn't come often, so she seldom went shopping for groceries. For her meals, it was either instant noodles or simple dishes. She wouldn't spend unnecessary money. Thus, with the remaining ingredients, she could only make 3 dishes and a soup. Xiaoxi tied the apron around her waist and casually twisted her hair up with a hair tie. She cooked quickly, preparing a tomato and egg soup, shredded cucumber, stir-fried pork, and cold preserved eggs. Ji Huaibei stood at the kitchen door observing the scene. The dim light cast a serious and focused look on the woman's profile, stirring something in his heart. Xiaoxi placed the dishes on the table and served him a bowl of rice. Ji Huaibei stood still, and Xiaoxi, looking at the simple meal on the table, felt a bit embarrassed. She awkwardly explained, "I didn't know you'd return, so I didn't prepare. Sit down and eat with me." His cold voice interrupted her unfinished explanation. Xiaoxi sat down hesitantly and served herself a bowl of rice. Ji Huaibei placed a lot of meat into her bowl, his expression still cold. "Eat more, you're too thin. It's uncomfortable to the touch." Xiaoxi instantly understood the implication of his words, her face warming as she silently cursed him as a rogue in her heart. In fact, Ji Huaibei simply wanted her to eat a little more. His previous resentment towards her had overshadowed his attention to her, and he had never observed Xiaoxi carefully. There was hardly any flesh on her body. She had lost so much weight in such a short period that her slender frame seemed like it could be blown over by the wind at any moment, always causing concern. So he wanted her to eat more, but the words he used didn't sound that nice. The meal was eaten in silence, but Ji Huaibei felt a trace of warmth and even a little comfort in his heart.
Chow.
She quietly tidied up the dishes, and Ji Huaibei gestured for her to sit down. Sitting next to Ji Huaibei, she suddenly felt a bit nervous inside. She didn't know what Ji Huaibei intended to do. Unexpectedly, Ji Huaibei handed her a card. "Here is 300,000 yuan as a reward for you. This month's payment will still be deposited into your account on time." The implication is that this money was extra for her. This meant that the funds for A's surgery were one step closer, and she would soon be able to take A's abroad for treatment. Thinking of this, Xiaoxi's eyes curved with joy, unable to suppress her inner happiness. "Thank you." Ji Huaibei kept a cold expression and said nothing, but in reality, he was somewhat affected inside. Xiaoxi performed well in bed that night. She was truly engaged. The window was open in the dark night, and the moonlight outside refracted through the thin window. The low moans within the room were enough to make one's heart race and cheeks flush. Xiaoxi sat on Ji Huaibei, her fingers couldn't help but caress his determined jawline. Thinking about the insurmountable barrier between them, Xiaoxi suddenly felt a bit sad. Very soon, they would end things, and she would leave him, no longer to disturb Ji Huaibei's life. Xiaoxi indulged herself a little tonight. Leaning on him, her sultry voice repeatedly murmured his name. Ji Huaibei, overcome with passion, gripped her waist and thrust with increasing intensity each time. This was probably the first time the two had been entangled so deeply. From that day onward, Ji Huaibei often came to her place and even took the initiative to call her, asking her to wait for him so they could have dinner together. The two lived as if they were an ordinary married couple. She stayed at home, waiting for her husband's return. Ji Huaibei's attitude towards her also changed. It was no longer as violent as before, like a storm wanting to sweep her away. Xiaoxi cherished these times. Their relationship gradually became less cold and began to resemble that of a couple in love. However, Xiaoxi's life was not meant to be so smooth. She thought life could continue to be stable like this, but there were people who wouldn't allow it. Xiaoxi went to the supermarket to buy some groceries, but she didn't expect to meet someone she used to work with on the way. "Xiao. What a coincidence. I never thought I'd run into you here." The person calling her was Shan, with whom she had worked at the nightclub. Xiaoxi was slightly surprised, and before she could respond, Shan affectionately came over and linked arms with her. "It's been so long since we last met. Come on, I'll treat you to a meal, and we can have a good chat. We sisters all miss you." Xiaoxi wasn't really used to being overly affectionate with others, and she didn't quite know how to handle Shan's enthusiasm. However, she just nodded in the end. "Let me treat you instead." Perhaps it was because it had been so long since they'd seen each other. Shan talked a lot about various things. Finally, her tone shifted, and with curiosity in her eyes, she asked, "Xiao, I heard. You've been kept by that rich young Master Lu? Is it true?" This rumor had already spread long ago, and Xiaoxi stirred her coffee silently, lowered her head and smiled. Yes, just like the rumors you've heard. She has nothing to hide. The more someone tries to conceal something, the more curious others become, eventually digging it out piece by piece in a more bloodthirsty way. A hint of disdain and mockery flashed in Shan Shan's eyes, but it quickly disappeared, leaving only a feigned smile. Qiao, honestly, we've worked together for so long, and I am truly happy for you to have found such a good match. But on another note, young Master Lu is so handsome and wealthy. He's the desire of all our sisters. You've been by his side for so long. You must have genuinely fallen for him, right? There was a hint of probing in her words. She was stunned for a moment. Her life already had no future, and she was no longer that pure. What right did she have to talk about love, or not? The bitterness and loneliness in her eyes quickly disappeared. She pursed her lips, her face carrying a seductive look and her tone slightly frivolous. Shan, you should know better than I do that in our line of work. There's no talk of liking or disliking. I'm just an escort, and being with Ji Huaibei is simply because he pays more generously than others. While saying these words, her heart was filled with sharp pain, but her expression remained calm and indifferent. Once I've got the money, I'll take my brother and go abroad. That's my real aim. Their time together was brief. Half an hour later, Shan found an excuse to leave hurriedly, and she didn't stop her. She sat quietly in her place, gazing into the distance, with a persistent sorrow etched between her brows. Shan exited the cafe, took out her phone from her bag and made a call. Hey, I've got what you wanted, and I'm bringing it to you now. The person on the other end of the phone said something that made Shan smile. Don't worry, I'll send the recording to Mr. Liu right away. She stayed outside for a while and remembered that she hadn't gone grocery shopping yet. She quickly checked the time on her wristwatch. It was already 6 o'clock. She rushed to finish her shopping at the supermarket and, worried that Ji Huaibei might get home early, she took a cab straight back. When changing her shoes at the entrance, she noticed the man's shoes already there. With a hint of joy on her face, she quickly switched to slippers and hastened toward the main hall. Huaibei, you're home so early today. Her words were abruptly stuck in her throat as she heard nothing but suggestive sounds coming from the main hall, and the owner of that voice was herself. So, how about it? The leading lady in this is quite wanton, isn't she? He sneered at her. Xiaoxi's body instantly turned cold as she stiffly turned her head to see the large TV screen on the wall playing a video of her and Ji Huaibei making love. Those unbearable memories suddenly surged into her mind. The image of herself had ingrained recklessness, leaving her feeling unsettled, as if all her breath was stifled in her chest. The scene made her hands and feet go cold instantly. She looked at Ji Huaibei in disbelief, gritting her teeth. Are you crazy? Ji Huaibei paused the unbearable sounds emanating from the video. He stood up and pressed Xiaoxi beneath him, looking down at her with an expression full of disdain. A suggestive and frivolous smile appeared on his lips. Xiaoxi, as I was browsing the video, I found that you actually look quite good. You're worth this price, but your skills need some improvement. A bloodthirsty grin bloomed. You've been a hostess for so long and lack even this bit of professionalism? Now, please me. Xiaoxi's mind roared, and every word Ji Huaibei said right now was enough to stab her heart, making her feel breathless. Her hand was forced to hold onto him, and his handsome yet resolute face was staring at her with cold eyes. She could see from his eyes that he truly detested her. A slight bitterness rose in her heart. She tried to understand the reason, her voice somewhat hoarse, and without making any other movements, she slightly raised her head to look at him, weakly saying, Huaibei, is there some misunderstanding between us? I think we should. Before she could finish her sentence, her chin was gripped hard by him, the fingertips gradually tightening, with a force as if intending to destroy her. Ji Huaibei's eyes were bloodshot as he looked mockingly at Xiaoxi. Don't act in front of me, Xiaoxi. I genuinely considered giving you a chance. Everything was brought on by yourself. From today on, if you dare to cross the line, don't blame me for being unkind. Now your brother still probably needs the money I give you, right? It was like her lifeline had been pinched, and Xiaoxi's voice instantly choked up. For a whole hour, during which Ji Huaibei truly made Xiaoxi feel worse than death. Ji Huaibei bent down and grabbed her hair harshly. Xiaoxi, you are my mistress. If I haven't given you permission to leave, you can't walk out that door. Otherwise, I can cut off your financial resources at any time, and then you'll just have to watch your brother die helplessly. After throwing out a threat, he slammed the door and left. Xiao Shi numbly entered the bathroom, standing under the shower head with her head tilted up, as hot water streamed over her body. Today was an absolute nightmare for Xiao Shi. From the beginning of the video to Ji Huaibei's insults, every scene is etched in her min. She didn't understand how just a couple of days ago, they were fine, and even last night, he treated her well. Why did everything change overnight? Or does she really mean nothing more than a mistress in his eyes? So she has no dignity in front of him, and he can do whatever he wants to her when he's displeased, treating her as a tool for venting. Her mind suddenly cleared up. Was her previous thought overly sentimental? Why would she assume that Ji Huaibei would change for her? That he would still have any feelings left for her? If that were the case, he wouldn't have married Li Xing'an. Thinking of this, Xiao Shi couldn't help but curl her lips into a cold smile. Ji Huaibei, if you think this makes you happy, then it doesn't matter to me. As long as she endures for a little longer, she can leave this place with Aze, so all the current torment is simply a hurdle she must grit her teeth and push through. It was raining heavily outside that day, and Xiao Shi couldn't sleep all night. When she came downstairs, she absent-mindedly dropped the glass she was holding, shattering it. As she squatted down to pick up the glass shards, a piece pierced deeply into her index finger, drawing blood instantly. Xiao Shi frowned tightly, the unease hidden in her heart gradually deepening, and even a chill ran down her back as if something big was about to happen today.
Say.
A fleeting thought made Xiao Shi's heart suddenly tighten. She no longer cared about Ji Huaibei's orders and ran out frantically. Braving the heavy rain to hail a taxi, she arrived at the hospital entrance drenched, her heart in constant suspense, as if any delay would lead to something terrible happening to her Aze. Getting out of the car, she didn't even have time to say thank you, hastily pulling a 100 yuan bill from her bag and handing it to the driver. She ran toward the hospital entrance like a madwoman, attracting strange looks from people passing by, as if they were looking at someone insane. She had just reached the hospital entrance when the terrified screams of the crowd reached her ears, followed by a dull thud, as if something had fallen from a great height and hit the ground, creating a violent sound. Someone let out a piercing scream, as if it was going to pierce her eardrums. She took a step forward, but was instantly thunderstruck. Her vision darkened slightly, for the person lying on the ground was A's. Xiao Shi's legs suddenly went weak, and she collapsed to the ground, surrounded by people. Her expression was ashen. She couldn't believe it was her A's. She pushed through the crowd, stumbling and crawling to A's side. Suddenly, a thunder rolled across the dark sky, startling everyone. Xiao Shi's hands trembled as she cradled A's face, holding him in her arms. Her chin rubbed against his cheek, and a smile more pitiful than tears appeared on her lips. A's, you can't sleep. Your medical expenses are almost covered by.
Sister.
Didn't you promise me you'd wait for me to take you abroad, and we'll start afresh? Her frail shoulders trembled slightly in the torrential rain, her pale face devoid of any color. She was drenched from head to toe, her tears mingling with the rain. Aze's body had no warmth at all. Xiao Shi held onto him tightly, refusing to let go or accept the reality in front of her. Suddenly, a few women burst out from the crowd. It's her, the shameless woman seducing my husband. How does such a homewrecker have the face to live in this world? Sisters, drag her up. A woman looked at Xiao Shi arrogantly as the women beside her forcibly dragged Xiao Shi away. Xiao Shi screamed hoarsely. Aze. She struggled with all her might to break free. Let me go. However, the strength of those women was too much for her to overcome. After they pulled her away, they said little, surrounding her, with some kicking and others hitting her. After being viciously beaten, Xiao Shi couldn't feel the pain in her body. She tried to crawl toward Aze, but was quickly dragged back by her hair. Blood seeped from the corner of her lips, but it was quickly washed away by the rain. Xiao Shi was already on the verge of collapse, yet her eyes stubbornly fixed on Aze's direction. The leading woman quickly stripped Xiao Shi of all her clothes. Seeing that she might not make it, they feared causing a death, so they threw Xiao Shi into a trash bin before leaving. In the trash bin, Xiao Shi had no strength left. Blood continued to seep from the corner of her lips, and it seemed as if the slightest movement would shatter her body. Xiao Shi felt like her spirit was broken too. The determination she held onto for so long dissipated instantly. Finally, as darkness overtook her vision, she fainted. A car suddenly stopped in front of Xiao Shi. When Zhou Su saw Xiao Shi amidst the trash, his heart clenched. He couldn't believe what she had been through, so he quickly took off his coat and wrapped it around her, then carried her into the car and drove away. Everyone else's life continued as usual, except Xiao Shi had lost all hope, trapped in an endless abyss from which she couldn't awaken. The scene of Zhe falling keeps echoing in her dreams, replaying over and over again, with blood filling the entire vision. Then she suddenly wakes up, a layer of cold sweat on her forehead. She sits up, leaning against the headboard, and sees the scars on her arm, a reminder that what happened in her dream was real, not just a dream. She rested her head on her knees, hugging herself tightly, as if she couldn't cry anymore. The pain in her heart forced her to take deep breaths. She grabbed her hair and slapped herself hard twice. She, why didn't you arrive earlier? If you had gotten there sooner, none of this would have happened, and Zhe wouldn't have jumped. Her guilt had plunged her into an endless darkness, and the clear red marks from her fingers on her delicate face were heart-wrenching to see. It seemed as if she had already cried all her tears of her dreams, and Xiaoxi's eyes were so swollen they could barely open. After a while, she glanced around at her unfamiliar surroundings. She felt a sense of strangeness, and she got out of bed, lifting the quilt, but before she could reach the door, someone entered. She never expected it to be Zhou Su. The man was gentle and refined, seemingly wanting to say something to comfort her, but after his lips moved, he ultimately couldn't utter a word. Zhou Su handed her the medicine he was holding. This is a medicine concocted according to traditional Chinese practices. It will help with your recovery. Please drink it first. His voice was so soft, as if he feared a louder tone might overwhelm the woman in front of him. She softly whispered a thank you, but did not take the bowl of medicine. She gave Zhou Su an apologetic smile. Thank you for saving me. Then, she gave him a serious bow. She had lost the will to live, but just as she was about to walk away, the words from behind struck her like a bolt from the blue. Xiaoxi, you might not care about your own body, but are you also indifferent about the baby in your womb? What baby? Xiaoxi asked, shocked. He pulled Xiaoxi over and gently settled her on the bed, speaking slowly. The doctor said that the baby inside your belly is still not very stable. Zhou Su held her hand tightly, trying to convey some strength to her. Xiao, I know everything you've been through makes you very sad and makes you feel like you don't want to go on living, but the baby inside you still needs you. You are her mother, and if you don't take care of yourself, what will happen to her? Images flashed one after another in Xiaoxi's mind, leaving her in a daze, and she felt the corners of her eyes become moist as Zhou Su's figure blurred. Xiaoxi looked down at her shoe tips, unable to control her emotions any longer. She broke down crying. Zhou Su, take me away, I don't want to stay here. Take me away, anywhere is fine. I beg you. The Ji family. On the large television screen, the footage of Xiaoxi was being played, with a headline that was even more glaring. Mentioning the word mistress made the crowd's emotions quite agitated, and everyone stood in opposition to the mistress. Because the roadside surveillance clearly recorded all the footage, when Xiaoxi was being punched and kicked, passers-by merely glanced with indifference before returning to their own business. Ji's mother sat on the sofa, casting a sidelong glance at Ji Huaibei with a hint of implication. Huaibei, did you see that? What kind of person meets this kind of end wherever they go? I always knew this Xiaoxi was no good, seducing other people's husbands. Why would anyone do that, insist on being a mistress? It's truly hateful. Ji Huaibei glanced at the television AF. EW Times, his handsome brow furrowed slightly, and his tightly pressed lip line was very tense. Seeing he did not respond, Ji's mother feigned nonchalance and said, Good thing you broke up with her back then, or you'd really lose face completely. Enough. Ji Huaibei coldly scolded with his voice slightly raised. His reaction startled Mother Ji greatly, but in the end, she still retorted unwillingly, Am I not stating the truth? Hey, Huaibei, where are you going this late? Ji Huaibei grabbed his coat and drove swiftly to the apartment. When he saw the lights inside were still on, a wave of relief washed over him. He quickly got out of the car and hurried into the apartment, but did not expect it to be empty. Xiaoxi. He stood in the very center of the living room and called her name, but unlike usual, there was no gentle response from her. What answered him was a room full of silence. After a while, Aunt Anne came rushing down from upstairs in a fluster. Mr. Ji, Miss Chiao is not here. Ji Huaibei's face darkened immediately, a touch of profound coldness flashing through his eyes. Where has she gone? Aunt Anne replied cautiously, Miss Chiao has already taken a flight abroad. The hand by Ji Huaibei's side instantly clenched into a fist. He didn't go home. Instead, he kept sitting in the apartment on the sofa, where her scent still filled every corner. He could even see her obediently sitting on the living room sofa waiting for his return. Ji Huaibei didn't turn on the lights, submerging himself in darkness. All he saw in front of him were images related to Xiaoxi. He raised his hand to rub his temples, and the TV in front of him suddenly switched to a news channel. We interrupt with breaking news. A flight to the United States has unexpectedly experienced an accident, leading to an explosion. The status of the passengers is still under investigation, but current information suggests there are no survivors. We extend our condolences. Ji Huaibei didn't hear any of the anchor's subsequent words. His mind rang with a loud noise. Isn't this the flight Xiao Shi was on? He stared at the television for a long while, and when he absorbed this information, it felt as if his world crumbled. Xiao Shi, is this the end for us? 5 years later. Since Xiao Shi disappeared, Ji Huaibei seemed as if nothing had happened. He continued living his life as usual. He still remained the model husband everyone admired and treated Li Xing'an as well as ever. But suddenly, Xiao Shi returned, bringing along her 4-year-old daughter Rui with Zhou Su. Li Xing'an's smile was a bit stiff, and she was even somewhat frightened, wondering whether the woman in front of her was human or a ghost. However, having a strong mental fortitude, she quickly reined in the emotions and expressions that shouldn't have emerged, and greeted her with a gentle smile. What a coincidence, I did next. CT to meet Miss Xiao here, right, Huaibei? She smiled and glanced at Ji Huaibei, whose eyes were bloodshot as if he wanted to devour Xiao Shi alive. Xiao Shi appeared indifferent the entire time, never deliberately looking at Ji Huaibei, with neither hatred nor the tenderness of the past. Her glance at him was merely a polite passing glance, as if he were merely an acquaintance. Xiao Shi smiled and turned her face away, the radiance of happiness unmistakable. Yes, my husband is in the maritime business, and this restaurant is owned by him. If you have time in the future, feel free to come by often. Without a trace, she revealed her current life, making Li Xing'an's face turn somewhat unpleasant and unable to hide it. Xiao Shi nodded slightly. Mrs. Ji, enjoy your meal. Please excuse me for now. After just a few steps away, Ji Huaibei realized and stood up, grabbing her hand tightly with some anger on his face. Aren't you supposed to be dead? Xiao Shi didn't turn back and wasn't bothered to struggle. Mr. Ji, you're hurting me. Let go. Ji Huaibei was still in shock. When he saw her walking toward him alive, he was overwhelmed with inner joy, but after coming to his senses, he was filled with anger. If she was alive for all these 5 years, why didn't she come to find him? Thinking of this made him feel like he was about to explode. When the little girl heard her mother say it hurts, she immediately started punching and kicking him. You bad guy, let go of my mom. Ji Huaibei finally shifted some of his attention away from Xiao Shi, and while staring intently at the little girl, he asked Xiao Shi through gritted teeth, is she your child? Xiao Shi used her other hand to pull the little girl. Be good, come behind mom. However, the little girl wasn't afraid of Ji Huaibei. She pouted her chubby cheeks and glared at him, looking innocently cute. Daddy said to protect mommy well and not let mommy get hurt. A surge of jealousy inexplicably rose in Ji Huaibei's heart as he stared straight at Xiao Shi with an intense, intimidating gaze. Xiao Shi raised her delicate eyebrows slightly. Mr. Ji, Mrs. Ji is still here. What are you trying to do? Li Xing'an's fingers gripped the edge of the table, almost at the point of exploding, yet a faint smile remained on her face, not revealing the least bit of her anger. Ji Huaibei did not let her go but instead asked again. Weren't you dead? Why are you here? Hearing this question, Xiao Shi couldn't help but find it amusing. She raised an eyebrow with a mocking smile at the corner of her lips. You can also consider me as dead. This sentence seemed to hit Ji Huaibei as if by a blow, causing him to absent-mindedly release her hand. Xiao Shi politely nodded at Li Xing'an and left with Rui. The news that Xiao Shi was still alive quickly reached Mother Ji, of course, thanks to Li Xing'an, who went to her, full of grievance, to report the matter. Moreover, her words were subtle, even somewhat skillfully conveying a threat to Mrs. Ji, who didn't want her son to be enchanted by this woman again. So, she resolutely decided to go find Xiao Shi. Naturally, the restaurant's address was given to her by Li Xing'an. She stood at the entrance, looking disdainfully at the restaurant, thinking that Xiao Shi must have become someone's mistress again to have such a restaurant. She pushed open the door, and the staff warmly welcomed her with a welcome. Mrs. Ji immediately spotted Xiao Shi coming down the stairs. Without a word, she walked straight toward Xiao Shi and raised her hand to slap her, but the action was forcibly stopped. Xiao Shi reacted much faster than she did, tightly gripping Mrs. Ji's hand, rendering her immobile. There was a faint and gentle smile on her lips, but her words brought tears to Mother Ji's eyes. Let me guess, you must be saying the same things as back then, right? Trying to scare me off so I'd leave your son. Mother Ji was so angered by her that her face did not look good, but her hand was held so tightly that she couldn't move. Xiao Shi released her hand with a slight smile. Auntie, you really haven't changed since then. Your self-righteousness remains just the same. Mother Ji gritted her teeth tightly. You're just from a poor neighborhood. What right do you have to be with my son? I was disgusted when you got pregnant and pushed you away on purpose. Without a child, my son won't be burdened. If she hadn't brought up the past, Xiao Shi would have almost forgotten about it. But now that she had, all those memories resurfaced, and she frowned tightly. What do you think your son is? Xiao Shi, do not love him. Not now nor ever. Oh, really? Mrs. Ji sneered. Then why did you come back? Xiao Shi, didn't you return just for Huaibei's money? Tell me how much you want, and I'll give it to you. But if you dare to disrupt my son's life again, don't blame me for being rude. Her words were sinister and full of threat. Xiao Shi couldn't help but chuckle, shaking her head but remaining silent. Mrs. Ji was unsettled by her reaction, but the anger in her heart only grew stronger. What are you laughing at? You should look in the mirror and see how pitiful you look with that menacing expression. Xiao Shi turned away, unwilling to engage with her any further. However, Mrs. Ji refused to relent. She still saw Xiao Shi as the delicate and frail girl from years ago, someone she could condemn to despair with just a few words or actions. So she tugged hard at her, but Xiao Shi halted her steps, turning back with a cold glare. Let go of me, or don't blame me for being rude. Startled by the icy look in her eyes, Mrs. Ji felt a jolt of fear. That gaze made her feel frightened. Despite a lingering unease, she refused to back down and continued to glare at her. How much money do you need to leave my son? Xiao Shi let out a call. Di laughed, locking eyes with Mrs. Ji. Ji Huaibei might be a treasure to you, but he holds no value for the me of today. Instead of wasting your time on me, you'd better go find Ji Huaibei and tell him to stop bothering me. You. Mrs. Ji was so furious, she almost spat out blood. Xiao Shi didn't want to get entangled with her any longer, so she turned and left. The red pen in her palm was flashing green light, which meant that all her conversations with Ji's mother had been fully recorded. Returning to this place, back to this city, she was fully prepared for whatever challenges might come her way. Having experienced life and death, these things didn't mean much to her anymore. Moreover, she would no longer allow those people to trample over her and get away with it. She returned to the restaurant's upper floor just as Zhou Su finished his call. Seeing her come in, he smiled slightly. How about we take Ruiri to the amusement park this evening? Xiao Shi stood by his side, gazing into the distance, her tone filled with gratitude. I really don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you, Ruiri and I might not have survived. These years, you have cared for us despite what others said. Zhou Su patted her on the shoulder, stopping her from continuing. With a faint smile, he said, Qiao Qiao, there's no need to explain our relationship to me. I understand it well. Over the years, it's been thanks to you and Rui staying by my side that I've been so happy. Seeing his earnest expression, Xiao Shi couldn't help but chuckle. Why are we suddenly being so polite? In any case, Zhou Su, I owe you a lot and hope to repay it someday. Hearing this, Zhou Su's faint smile in his eyes faded, and he looked at Xiao Shi seriously. What if I want you? Xiao Shi was slightly taken aback. She had been with Zhou Su for so many years, and he had always been respectful, never mentioning matters of feelings. But since returning to the country, he seemed to have changed somewhat. Seeing that Xiao Shi looked somewhat troubled, ultimately not wanting to put her in a difficult position, he smiled and said, I was just joking earlier, Qiao Qiao. I've understood you very well over the years. I haven't forced you to do anything you didn't want to do in the past, and I won't now or in the future. The two exchanged smiles and skipped over the topic. They had originally planned to go to the amusement park in the evening, but the activity was cancelled because Zhou Su suddenly had urgent business to attend to. Xiao Shi took Xiao Rui out for a walk and bought some household necessities at the mall. Her hands were full of daily essentials. Xiao Rui, bouncing with energy, found everything about this city fascinating. Returning to this city in a hurry, Xiao Shi hadn't rented a place. She had spent all her money on Aze's surgery and naturally didn't have any assets here. Therefore, Zhou Su suggested that she and Ruiri move into Hai's villa first. Xiao Shi was somewhat hesitant, not because she cared about her own reputation, but because she feared that her presence might implicate Zhou Su. Before she went abroad, news of her situation had spread across the city, and she had almost become a publicly denounced homewrecker. So if she stayed by Zhou Su's side, public opinion would undoubtedly target him as well. But all her concerns were unraveled by a few words from Zhou Su. Xiao Shi, I want to protect you and Ruiri. I don't need anything in return from you, but, I'm already used to having you two in my life. It's not easy for you to manage everything alone. If you're thinking of moving out on your own with Ruiri, have you truly considered what's best for him? Xiaoxi lowered her head, her eyes averted. She realized she had only been focused on the immediate situation and had not thought carefully about what might be best for Ruiri. With heartfelt sincerity, Zhou Su said, "Qiao Qiao, I now regard you and Rue as family. I wish to do everything in my power to protect you both from harm. However, if one day you truly find your own happiness, I won't stand in your way." His words brought a lump to Xiaoxi's throat, making her realize how selfish she had been. Ever since she followed him to the US, she had been a burden to him, and now, even after returning home, she continued to trouble him. Because what she was about to do next was inherently dangerous. To take care of her and Rue, Zhou Su had hired a nanny who was very easygoing and both meticulous and kind. Rue adored her and stuck to her side every day. Xiaoxi was running out of time, so she needed to quickly investigate the evidence concerning Azay's death, something she had been too afraid to touch. She couldn't believe that a young child would entertain thoughts of suicide. Xiaoxi drove to the hospital and parked at the bottom, watching the place in front of the car where A's last touched the ground, as pedestrians came and went. All the memories buried deep in her heart suddenly surged up. Her slender fingers gripping the steering wheel gradually tightened, as the despair from that time instantly struck her heart, as if someone was trying to rip her heart out. She found it hard to breathe and quickly grabbed the bottle of water next to her, twisting the cap open to take several large gulps. Only then did her state of mind begin to calm down. Hospitals generally don't allow the viewing of surveillance footage. If someone were exerting pressure behind the scenes, the hospital would be even less likely to release the footage. Xiaoxi sat in the director's office, where the director's forehead was covered with a thin layer of sweat, yet he had no choice but to continue the conversation with her. Xiaoxi placed the documents in her hand onto his desk and smiled faintly. "Dean, back then, this matter caused a huge uproar. Yet all the reports about it were quickly withdrawn. Shouldn't there be a conclusion for my brother's death?" Her voice was soft, but every word was firm and powerful. Sweat continued to drip from the dean's forehead. He had thought this matter was long resolved, but who would have expected Xiaoxi to suddenly return and dig into the case concerning Qiao Zhe from the very beginning? If this wasn't handled well, his position as the dean might be finished. Xiaoxi was not someone who would rigidly hit a dead end. She was now employing some strategies to exploit her opponent's psychological weak points. The man sitting across from her was so incredibly ambitious. If this matter implicated him, his career would undoubtedly be destroyed. How could he possibly do something that would ruin his future? "Dean Huang, I entrusted A's to your hospital back then because I trusted you. But how did it end? Such a young child jumping to his death from a tall building. Do you think that's even possible? If I insist on thoroughly investigating this matter, whether by leveraging the power of the media or the police, I believe there will be a result very soon." The director's face turned ashen. He adjusted his glasses and finally let out a long sigh. "Miss Qiao, we have always felt deeply sorry about your brother's case, especially since he was such a young child. So, allow me to review the surveillance footage from that year. I need to know what happened to my brother before his death, who he met. If even this basic right is denied to me, then I have every reason to suspect that his death is somehow connected to you. Otherwise, why are you stopping me from viewing the footage?" Pressed relentlessly by Xiaoxi, the director finally agreed to let her investigate the surveillance footage from that year. In the surveillance room, the staff searched for a long time before finally locating videos from 5 years ago related to Aze. In the footage, she had just left the hospital when Li Xing'an entered the ward. At first, she and A seemed to converse happily, though intermittently. She visited often, and each time was right after Xiaoxi left, as she would promptly step into the ward. However, the very last time, which was just before A's suicide attempt, she had something unknown in her hands, showing A some photographs. After seeing those photos, A's emotions clearly became very agitated. Seeing these heart-wrenching scenes, Xiaoxi's fingers were deeply embedded in her palms. She bit her lower lip tightly, and the taste of blood spread in her mouth. The director standing nearby spoke up at the right moment. "Miss Qiao, we can understand your feelings as a family member, but it's impossible to use this video alone to pin any charges on anyone." Xiaoxi returned to the villa from the hospital in a daze, broken and despondent. She sat on the balcony, letting the cold wind blow against her face. Tilting her chin upward, she exhaled deeply.
AF.
To all the effort she had put in, she had gained nothing in the end. She was lost in thought and failed to notice the sound of footsteps behind her. Zhou Su had been standing behind her for quite a while. Noticing her persistent frown, he finally called out her name. It was only then that Xiaoxi snapped back to reality, suppressing the bitterness in her heart. She smiled at him and said, "You're back." The balcony of the villa lacked glass windows, allowing the wind to howl loudly through the space. Zhou Su took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "It's so cold out here. Come back to the living room." "It's fine. I just want to sit here for a while." "It's late. You should get some rest," she replied, rubbing her temples as she felt a headache coming on. Curling up her body, she tried to make herself more comfortable, hoping to ease the pain even slightly. Zhou Su had been with her for so many years that he knew her body better than she did herself. He immediately realized she must be feeling unwell, so he turned back to the living room, took the medicine he had prepared specifically for her, and poured a cup of hot water. After taking the medicine, Xiaoxi felt that her headache eased significantly. She turned her body slightly, curled up into a ball, and smiled at him. "Zhou Su, thank you." Zhou Su sat beside her helplessly and said, "What kind of trouble are you dealing with? If there's anything I can help with, just let me know. I'll do everything I can." Xiaoxi believed his words. Over the past 5 years, if not for Zhou Su, she would have already been buried under a pile of dirt. So aside from gratitude, what Xiaoxi felt most toward him was guilt. She didn't want to burden him with anything more. "Zhou Su, do you know? I'm fully aware of all the kindness you've shown me. If we had met at the right time, I would have chosen you without hesitation." Her sudden words caught Zhou Su off guard. He originally thought he had a chance, but what Xiaoxi said afterward made Zhou Su realize that Xiaoxi had never let go of that person in her heart. The atmosphere between the two gradually became silent, but it was also the first time they had opened their hearts to each other. In the past, Zhou Su was worried that his abrupt approach might scare her, so he always presented himself as a steady and measured man in front of her. But now he wants to try harder, at least to avoid having any regrets. Zhou Su half-squatted in front of her, his fingers stroking her hair. "Qiao Qiao, I respect all your choices, so you don't need to feel guilty towards me. Because I understand you, the Xiaoxi I know is a kind woman. You stick to your choice, and I will stick to mine. In this lifetime, I am committed to only you." Xiaoxi hugged her knees with both hands, tears glistening in her eyes. Her tears suddenly slipped down from her eyes, as now she only dared to be her true self and not pretend in Fr. ONT of Zhou Su. The two of them were having a long, heartfelt conversation on the balcony. Xiaoxi copied the hospital's video footage and watched it over and over again. Although such behavior was essentially self-torture, she could only grit her teeth and try to find some clues in the video. It suddenly started to rain heavily outside. Xiaoxi stood up and was hit by a dizzy spell. She quickly grabbed the sofa for support, her face turning pale. Sometimes it is fate that no one can change. The rain outside got heavier, with raindrops the size of beans hitting the windows like a symphony, making people feel less tense and allowing the whole body to relax. Xiaoxi lay sideways on the bed with her eyes closed, forcing herself to enter a state of sleep through gritted teeth. Perhaps because she spent the whole day watching Aze's last video before he passed away, all the dreams she had in her sleep were those scenes from the video. Xiaoxi was startled awake, sitting up straight in bed. Her pajamas were soaked with a layer of cold sweat, and her hands and feet were frighteningly cold. The rain outside had stopped. Xiaoxi got out of bed and changed into a fresh set of pajamas. She picked up a red pen and drew a circle on the calendar, marking that her time was decreasing day by day. Some things needed to be done as soon as possible. Her first target was, of course, Li Xing'an. After her car followed Li Xing'an, Xiaoxi discovered that Li Xing'an was actually quite pitiable. Her entire day was spent shuttling through malls, then having afternoon tea and chatting with those wealthy wives. Xiaoxi sat in the car, propping her head on her left hand against the window, her eyes slightly squinting in a daze. She suddenly felt that Li Xing'an was actually much more deep-minded than she had imagined. Not far away, Li Xing'an seemed to be saying goodbye to her girlfriends. Xiaoxi felt a bit disappointed. She had followed Li Xing'an for a day, without obtaining any useful information. It was already evening, and just as she was about to drive away, she discovered something very interesting. Li Xing'an didn't leave the restaurant. Instead, she hid herself thoroughly with sunglasses and a hat and got into a man's car. With a woman's intuition, Xiaoxi could guess that Li Xing'an's relationship with the man in the car was something special, which Xiaoxi had not expected. The car in front slowly started moving, and Xiaoxi hurriedly followed. These two really had a lot of nerve. They went straight to the hotel. The man's hand was intimately wrapped around Li Xing'an's waist, and it slowly caressed down to her hips. Li Xing'an laughed as she playfully tapped him. Then the two quickened their pace, as if they couldn't wait. What was about to happen next was naturally self-evident. Li Xingyan never expected that her humiliating scene would be recorded by Qiao Shi on her phone. After doing all of this, Qiao Shi drove away. She arrived at the riverside, sitting alone on a bench with her gaze fixed on the seemingly calm water surface. However, with a slight breeze, a ripple would be stirred. And now Qiao Shi was that breeze. Soon she would stir up a wave. The video of Li Xingyan fooling around with the man went viral on the internet for a while, and this matter quickly dragged the Li family into it. Li Corporation was suddenly exposed for delaying salary payments because several major projects had outstanding balances, and the business administration had also intervened in the investigation. At this moment, it was indeed adding insult to injury for the Li family. Li Xingyan didn't even dare to step outside her door, constantly feeling as if reporters were ambushing her outside. Over time, she felt like a paranoid, convinced that the whole world was out to get her. She didn't dare to turn on the TV or the computer, completely isolating herself from everything outside, until one day her father called her. It turned out that all the scandals suddenly exposed about the Li family were because of her, and he asked her to plea with Ji Huaibei, believing he must have a way to resolve it. Ji Huaibei had already mentioned the divorce on the day Qiao Shi returned, but she was not yet ready to give up on him, so she also wanted to take this opportunity to have a good talk with him and see if there could be any room for maneuver. Li Xingyan had just stepped out and hadn't yet reached her garage, when suddenly someone covered her head with a black hood halfway there, plunging her into darkness. Someone struck her from behind, and she completely lost consciousness. When she woke up, she found herself lying on a sofa, dressed in a maid outfit. Li Xingyan was so startled that she sat up immediately. Directly across from her was a mirror, allowing her to clearly see herself. Beneath the maid outfit, her delicate and elegant legs were exposed, and the black stockings made her legs look long and alluring. On her head were rabbit ears, making her appear endearing, while the blush on her face was enough to stir the imagination. Li Xingyan quickly realized something was wrong. She ran to the door to open it, only to find it was locked and she couldn't get it open. She screamed until her voice was hoarse, with no response. Only when she was completely exhausted did she hear a noise coming from the hallway. "Mr. Zhou, the person you wanted has been prepared for you." Li Xingyan got up from the floor, as the door was opened from the outside. Her heart was filled with unease, but once she saw the face of the person entering, she was left only in shock. She never expected that the person coming in would be Zhou Su. Zhou Su sat calmly on the sofa, leisurely observing Li Xingyan's current miserable state, but his eyes never strayed to her, as if he had no desire for her at all. Zhou Su was a gentleman, so Li Xingyan asked. He wouldn't dare to do anything to her. She sneered and walked over to him, sitting down at his side, her fingers teasingly tracing over Zhou Su's chest. "TSK, Zhou Su, I thought you were deeply in love with Qiao Shi, but it seems not. Are you here because you've grown tired of her?" A faint smile played on Zhou Su's lips as he brushed away her wandering hand, then wiped the spot she'd touched with a tissue. He spoke slowly. "Li Xingyan, your comeuppance has already arrived. Qiao Shi is soft-hearted and unwilling to do many things, but I don't mind doing them on her behalf." He smiled faintly, yet the chill in his eyes felt piercing. "You must be feeling very warm right now, right? Don't worry, there are plenty of men to satisfy your needs." Li Xingyan hadn't yet processed what he meant when three men suddenly rushed in from outside. Zhou Su strode away and, while still in the corridor, heard Li Xingyan's painful cries. He merely tossed the tissues in his hand into the trash bin without looking back. Everything has come to an end. Li Xingyan has been punished. Qiao Shi entrusted all matters properly and boarded the plane without looking back, leaving only the words goodbye. Ji Huaibei received the items she sent before leaving, which included a recording and a letter. The recording was of a conversation between Qiao Shi and Ji's mother in a restaurant. After listening, Ji Huaibei's expression changed drastically. He opened the envelope, which contained the following message. "Ji Huaibei, it's your mother who couldn't accept me. I didn't protect our first child well, but I've raised Xiao Rui very well. I really wanted to grow old with you, but it seems I won't have that chance. Please take care of Rui in the future." It was at that moment that Ji Huaibei realized Rui was his child. Ji Huaibei drove frantically to find Zhou Su. "You're too late." That was the first thing Zhou Su said before handing him a medical diagnosis. Qiao Shi was diagnosed with late-stage brain cancer and has been hanging on until now. Qiao Shi chose to go to a quiet place to die. Zhou Su patted him on the shoulder. "Since she didn't want you to find her, it means you won't be able to. The only thing you can do is to raise Rui well and not let her down." Ji Huaibei didn't believe it. Later, he searched many places but found no trace of her. Ji Huaibei stood by the sea, holding Rui's hand, father and daughter gazing into the distance. Since Jiaoxi left, Ji Huaibei began growing a beard, making him look as though he had weathered many hardships. Dad, when can I see Mom? Ji Huaibei crouched down and, seeing the face that was 70% similar to hers, couldn't help but soften his heart as he embraced her. Good child, we will find Mom. But in reality, Ji Huaibei knew that he had truly lost Jiaoxi, and in this life,